Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. The 2015 prophetic year in review. From the perspective of Bible prophecy, 2015 may be remembered as the year Satan's key project began to rise. Since at least the time of Nimrod, Satan has been laying the foundation for a one-world government with his man in charge. Through the millennia since, he's had successes and setbacks. But in 2015, the foundation became complete enough for him to begin building the actual edifice. 2015 seemed to bring us to critical time when Satan's one-world order got on final track. One of the major steps in that direction came from a surprising source. In 2015, the Republican Congress authorized sweeping new powers for the President of the United States to negotiate trade deals. What do trade deals have to do with a one-world government? Let's look at one such agreement. On October 5th, 12 Pacific Rim nations agreed to form the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The terms were finally made public on November 5th. Congress cannot amend the agreement. It must vote yes or no, and that won't happen until at least February. But right now, TPP looks like a shoo-in to pass. Prophetically, the important thing is that this so-called trade deal actually forms a new governmental entity separate from the nations that agreed to it. Article 27 of the TPP says, "The parties hereby establish a Trans-Pacific Partnership Commission. The Commission shall consider any proposal to amend or modify this agreement and take such other action as the parties may agree. The Commission, created by the treaty, will have the power to change the treaty however it sees fit." This means not the U.S. Congress and not the legislatures of the other governments involved. Only the TPP Commission will have the power to change the treaty. Like any government, the Commission will have its own courts. They are called arbitration tribunals. These courts will have the authority to impose multi-billion-dollar fines large enough to harm even the United States economy. The taxpayers of any government that does not comply with the Commissioner's orders will pay dearly. If it were only about trade, it would be bad enough. But this monstrosity of an agreement is about all kinds of things other than trade. It includes such provisions as immigration, redistribution of wealth, education, human rights, gay rights, same-sex marriage, gun control, health care, women's reproductive rights, abortion, and sustainable development. The TPP Commission has the authority to protect wildlife, trees, and wetlands. That means it controls the water and the land. It has the authority to stop pollution wherever it chooses. Sounds great until you realize that pollution is often simply a matter of opinion. That gives the TPP Commission vast and vaguely defined authority over everything from major industries to family farms. As to trade, it gives foreign corporations full access to American markets and gives them huge advantages over American companies. It limits the ability of individuals and groups to boycott products from specific nations. If, as private citizen, you decide to organize a boycott of that product, the TPP stipulates that you can be sued. Maybe you simply prefer American-made products. Under this agreement, there will be no more Made in the USA labels. Why would a trade agreement eliminate nation of origin labels? Also, Why would a mere trade agreement need to create a new supranational government such as the TPP Commission? What's really going on? This is about ceding national sovereignty to international agencies. It's taking a giant step toward one world government, the Antichrist, and Armageddon. It's about placing everyone under the control of a ruling elite that ordinary citizens cannot vote on, remove, or replace. This is just one of several new extremely intrusive trade agreements now being finalized, including the TPP's companion treaty, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. But in 2015, TPP was not the worst deal of the year. In fact, it wasn't even the second worst. That distinction falls to the Iran nuclear deal. But the worst international agreement of 2015 was voted in unanimously by every member of the General Assembly of the United Nations. It is a so-called climate agreement known as Agenda 2030. The TPP agreement contains a clause stating that each party affirms its commitment to implement the multilateral environmental agreement to which it is a party. In other words, TPP signatories will be compelled to implement everything in the Agenda 2030. TPP tribunals will sanction any of its nations that do not fully comply, even if Agenda 2030 is not ratified by Congress. The TPP is a trade agreement that isn't about trade, and Agenda 2030 is a climate agreement that isn't about climate. Both of them are about the accumulation of power to an elite few. Agenda 2030 plans to reduce violence and death rates. What does that have to do with the environment? And how is it even possible to reduce death rates? The death rate has always been 100%, and the UN can't do anything about it to change it. But in trying, they can gather a great deal of power to themselves. Goal 16 of Agenda 2030 says, provide access to justice for all. That's not about the environment. That's about the nations of the world ceding power to a supranational government. The agenda says, by 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. Again, that has nothing to do with the climate change and everything to do with the construction of a one-world government. The UN or whatever world governing entity supersedes it will have an accounting of every person on the face of the earth, plus the biometric data to identify them with a photo, a fingerprint, or the minuscule amount of DNA found on a fallen eyelash. This will lead to the most extreme totalitarian regime ever conceived, and eventually to the mark of the beast. Climate change is the excuse for all of this. That's why the UN, NASA, and other agencies have been willing to lie, alter numbers, and generally disregard common sense in their push to make the world afraid of global warming. I'm not saying they're all world government conspirators. They each have their own reason for pushing the climate agenda, but the net result will be yet another step toward global government. In 2015, Pope Francis joined the call for global governance by elites. In June, he said, international negotiations cannot make significant progress due to positions taken by countries which place their national interest above the global common good. In other words, nations tend to act in their own best interest, and he thinks that that is bad. He also called for global regulatory norms to impose obligations and prevent unacceptable actions. He is calling for nations to be regulated by a higher agency. And in this context, Regulated is just another word for ruled. He said continuity is essential because policies related to climate change and environmental protection cannot be altered with every change of government. In a democracy, changes of government come from the will of the people. But he says that when it comes to the environment, government should cease to be responsive to the people's will. He wants to empower the elite few to write Ten Commandment-style laws on unalterable tablets of stone. He clearly forgets that only God gets to do that. The Pope has been hoodwinked by the secular agenda of those working for a one-world government. He seems not to understand that the 2030 agenda is not about climate. It never was. It is about the politics of a new world order. Climate fears will provide the moral justification for a few people to seize control of the whole earth. Democracy in some form has taken root across most of the world, but the elites can see what we all see. Representative government has stopped working well. It's inefficient. It's vulnerable to extremists. Most of us believe it's the best we can do until Jesus returns, but it's breaking down. The ultra-rich and highly honored of the world intend to take charge, believing that they are better qualified to run things than the great unwashed masses. Little do they realize that the power they seize now will soon be taken from them by an even smaller, more powerful elite. For the last couple of decades, European leaders have welcomed massive numbers of Muslims into their countries. But in 2015, the tide of Islamic immigrants rose to unprecedented levels. It went from migration to invasion. Islam probably does not have time to become dominant in Europe, but is growing so fast that it will create the kind of chaos from which the Antichrist will rise. While the United States has been thinking and talking about ISIS, Al-Qaeda and the Taliban have been reestablishing themselves in Afghanistan. During the campaign of 2012, the president bragged repeatedly that Al-Qaeda is on the run. But at the moment, Al-Qaeda is getting ready to run Afghanistan again. Al-Qaeda was never destroyed, and today it is growing across the Middle East and well into Asia. Their attack on a Mali hotel in November illustrates their increasing strength in Africa. As we enter 2016, Al-Qaeda remains well organized, well funded, and a force to be reckoned with. But it is no longer the big boy of world terror. That position now belongs to ISIS. In just 2 years, the Islamic State grew from Obama's JV team to a nation of its own. It now has a terror organization that reaches into the whole world. In 2015, the president said ISIS has been contained. Later that very day, an ISIS attack in Paris brought France and much of Europe to a screeching halt. Just over 2 weeks later, ISIS loyalists attacked the U.S. They killed 14 in San Bernardino and seriously injured another 22. ISIS has not been contained. It has spread. Its tentacles now reach into much of the world, including the United States. Terrorism makes people afraid, so they demand the government protect them. Government then increases protection by placing more controls on citizen rights. More government control means less individual freedom. Fear of terrorism joins fear of climate change and fear of economic meltdown. These things open the door to a supranational government agencies promising safety. In other words, these fears have us well on the road to one world government. In America, schools have redefined tolerance. In 1998, Josh McDowell and Bob Holsettler wrote a book called The New Tolerance. What they saw then has today mushroomed into brutal new despotism known as political correctness. Tolerance used to mean forbearance, or to allow, or to agree to disagree, or even to endure what you don't like. But schools today teach that tolerance means full endorsement, and that anything less than full endorsement equals intolerance. It started with the issue of homosexuality. Children were taught to believe that if you don't endorse and promote homosexuality, then you must be an intolerant bigot. In the last decade, this same absurd thinking has spread to Islam. So to teach school children tolerance of Islam, they are taught to embrace Islam. Ironically enough, the Muslim faith is the most intolerant of all major religions. Yet in the name of tolerance, schools teach American kids the tenets of Islam. In the United States today, we're not just importing Muslims at a fantastic rate. We're taking our own spiritually starved kids and turning them on to Muhammad and Allah. More and more young people who have no family or national ties to Islam are being caught plotting terror attacks in the name of ISIS. In his famous opening to A Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens wrote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." We find that sentiment in every generation. Some take comfort in it. Yes, things are bad, but they've always been bad. And besides, good things happen too. Jesus compared the time near his second coming to the days of Noah and Lot. In both stories, he emphasized that people took comfort in the sameness of things. Human activities continue as before, right up to the end. And just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it shall be also in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building, but on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It shall be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. Peter wrote, "Scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, 'Where is the promise of his coming?' For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation." On the surface, things seem the same, and yet everything important has changed. Later in that chapter, Peter quotes Jesus saying, "The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night." Paul also quoted Jesus on this, "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night." While they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like birth pangs upon a woman with a child, and they will not escape. He was speaking prophetically about us, this generation, and our time. But for those who know Christ, the teaching does not stop there. "But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then, let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober." That's why Jesus laid out signs by which to know his return is near. So we won't be in the dark, so that the day will not strike us like a thief. We will never know the precise time, but we are supposed to know when we have entered the general time frame. And friends, we're there. People allow themselves to be lulled into complacency, saying that everything is as it has always been. But deep down, they know something's wrong. The world feels askew. People are on the edge. Today, a car backfires and you hear someone scream out, then sheepishly look around to see if anyone noticed their small moment of terror. Something falls from a supermarket shelf and everyone ducks for cover. Something's off. Something's wrong. People feel it and they're afraid. Just before Christmas of 2015, Disney, the new owners of Lucasfilm, released the 7th Star Wars movie. It wasn't a remake of the first one released in 1977, but it hit all the basic themes of that giant hit. If you adjust for inflation and look at the largest grossing films of all time, you find something in common to almost all of them, a spirituality that loosely resembles Christian faith. It is not real Christianity. Call it Christianity light. While the most successful of all films usually have spiritual themes, they're not spiritually challenging. They are spiritually comforting. So it is with the Force in Star Wars, The Force Awakens. The most frightening line in the movie comes from one of the good guys, a character called Maz. "The Force is calling to you," she says. Just let it in. It's scary because the Force of Star Wars is not the one true God, and if you just let it in, when a spiritual entity calls, you will find yourself in a world of troubles. Revelation predicts a coming world religion. I'm not saying it will be based on Star Wars, but the mythology of the Force is one of many elements laying the groundwork for the coming religion. The success of the Star Wars films has been analyzed and psychoanalyzed. It has been dissected by everyone from the movie studios trying to replicate its success. I think the success in 1977 and again in 2015 boils down to something extremely basic. People are hungry for meaning. They're spiritually destitute. They don't know it, but they feel it. The original Star Wars and its latest film are both extremely religious movies. In 1977, America was going through a Christian awakening. I believe the overwhelming success of this new film shows that the fields are once again ripe unto harvest. Next time, part 2 of the 2015 prophetic year in review. But before we go, I need to talk to some of you who need to realize that you must personally accept the gospel of Jesus Christ. He who knew no sin was made sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in Him. You know, if we personally accept that Jesus Christ died on the cross for us, and we ask Him to come into our heart and make us what God wants us to be, we realize that because He lives, we have a new life. We can enter into that righteousness of God which is in you. Now, how does God transfer His righteousness into you? It's simple. He puts us in union with Christ, and that's a relationship so real that it will transfer God's righteousness to you. The righteousness of God is in your union with Christ, and that's what's going to give you a ticket to heaven. But you got to receive it personally. Do it now. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.